Our next speaker is going to be Joe Smentek. He's the Executive Director of the Minnesota Soybean Growers Association. He will speak for slightly less than half an hour. Then he'll take questions at the end of his presentation. You can submit your questions either through the Q&A or the chat at the bottom of your screen. Okay, go ahead, Joe.
All right, thanks. As Gary stated, I'm Joe Smentek. I'm the Executive Director of the Minnesota Soybean Growers Association. Let's see if I can get this thing to work here. All right, you should be seeing slides. If you're not, please comment or something.
We're seeing it, Joe, but we're on you're not in presentation mode. We see your next slide too.
Let's try. Well, I'm working on two screens, so I don't know how to make that happen. So
this will work.
All right, perfect. As Gary said, I'm the Executive Director of the Minnesota Soybean Growers Association. Most of you are probably familiar with the Growers Association. We're a membership-based advocacy group working to better the lives of Minnesota soybean farmers in the state. We have two lobbyists, Corey Bennett and AJ Dewar, in St. Paul, and then work with the American Soybean Growers Association, their national partner in DC, to lobby in DC. I am a lawyer by training. I have an advanced degree in environmental law. I've been working with the Soybean Checkoff and the Growers Association now for about 8 years. Maybe over 9, maybe up to 9. I lose track of time. It's been a while now, but really been working mainly on environmental issues and then the advocacy stuff that we do in St. Paul and in DC. So just starting at the basics with what I was going to talk about, and some of what I'll start talking about, Amanda Billick will follow up. We work in pretty close contact to talk about what we're going to talk about today so that we don't duplicate, but Minnesota, obviously, the state government is divided, like the federal government, into a legislative, executive, and judicial branch. In Minnesota, I'll be talking primarily here about the Minnesota Legislature today. Minnesota has a bicameral legislature. It's divided into a House and a Senate. And the state constitution expresses 3 requirements on what legislative districts that they have to comply with. So representation in both houses is apportioned equally throughout the state by population. Senators are chosen by single districts of convenient contiguous territory numbered in regular series. So the Senate districts are set, and then the House districts are set based upon that. No representative district may be divided in the formation of a Senate district. So you can't have a senator from an area and have a House member who has an area that covers 2 senators. So the way it breaks up, 1/3 of our legislature is senators, 2/3 of our legislature is going to be the House of Representatives. Minnesota, right now, we have the House districts, like I said, are based on the Senate district. So if you have Senate District 1, the House members that are going to be in that Senate district are always 1A and 1B. Minnesota's House of Representatives, 134 members. And that's been that way for about the last 40 years. Prior to that, there was 131 members. They're elected to 2-year terms, so they're up for election pretty much every election cycle. The Minnesota Senate is 67 members, again, half the number of the House members. Each district has 2 House districts, and they're elected to 4-year terms. The one hiccup in that is that when we do the census, everybody has to come back up for re-election. Because remember, we said that the population is the key to how we split things up, how we create those districts. So the 2020 census will have the House and Senate redrawing maps, redrawing districts. And in 2022, everybody will be back up for election like they were this year. So with that, we'll start getting into watching the trends or funds with maps. We just heard a lot about this has never happened before and how not to say that, but that's a lot of what we deal with here is this has not happened before. And we're used to seeing some trends in the legislature. We're used to seeing some trends with our politics in the state. This is the map of Minnesota in the last presidential election. So Biden and Trump Obviously, the blue counties are the counties that Biden won. The red counties are the counties Trump won. And really, this map holds true for pretty much the Republican-Democrat divide in the state. Basically, you can see the population centers, Rochester, Mankato, the Twin Cities metro area, around Fargo, and then around Duluth. The one that bounces back and forth and can't really decide what is going on is St. Cloud, and we'll see that in the House races. But for the most part, this is what the map looks like. We've seen this map become more true and more stable over the last few years with every race, including in the 7th district. We saw Colin Peterson lose out to Michelle Fischbach this year. Representative Fischbach took over this area, so which had all been blue, but as we can see on the presidential map is red. And when Governor Walz left the House of Representatives on the national level to become governor, this area in the south flipped red as well with Representative Hagedorn. So those House seats look similar to this. And as we can see in the Minnesota House, the map is pretty similar to that map, except for, this shows the 2016 general election. We see the population center still in blue. And we see these suburb areas still pretty red on this map. This legislature had actually a Republican control of 76 Republicans to 54, or 76 Republicans, 57 Democrats in control in this election in the House. The next election, they were all up in 2018. We saw this really kind of flip. And this is a trend that we're used to seeing. 2018 is obviously the midterms for President Trump, and the representation in the party that's in power usually goes down. And that is something we saw in Minnesota. A lot of these suburbs that were just on this last map in red or slightly blue became darker blue. The darker the shade, the higher the majority win. So the darker the blue, the more Democrat. So we saw a lot of these suburbs go blue, which led to a 75 to 59 flip of the Senate, or the House, where the Democrats took control with 75 seats over the 59 held by the Republicans. So this trend here in this blue getting bluer and red getting redder is something that we had been seeing and continued in this election. That comes into the next election, and this is really, we still see this large blue. If I flip back, you can see a little bit of the red maintaining, some of the blue getting a little bit lighter, but some of the blue getting much, much darker on this map. And you can see in this area, kind of coming back down from as blue as it was to meet up with more of the red and the darker red now around it. This population center here in Mankato stayed blue and got a little darker, but the neighboring county, Nicola County, which has North Mankato, but also a lot of rural areas, became red again from that light blue. And down here, we see a district that flipped from blue to red. Both of those are going to be very important, and the Iron Range lightened up quite a bit from the last maps, becoming less. Here's St. Cloud again. This is what I'm talking about with St. Cloud, still kind of going back and forth. As you get into a House district, you can see it a little bit clearer rather than on the county level or the Senate district level, just because it shows more of the population density in St. Cloud, that population center being blue, just like Mankato. And sometimes if you were to include the whole Senate district, this whole thing is blue, and that's really being driven by the population center there. So the trends that we can see are basically the red getting redder and the blue getting bluer. And when I was starting this presentation, kind of like the last speaker, said, I was hoping some things would happen. I thought some things would happen. We saw a lot of these areas here around the suburbs where we had House members that won and turned these seats blue. And as I said, those Senate districts, so we have 39A and B up here, if they both turn blue, there's a good chance that the senator is going to turn blue as well. I think a lot of people had expected after this 2018 election and looking at how these House seats broke up, that we would see a flip in the Senate in Minnesota. That did not happen. And that was really a product of some of these red counties, like this one up here in the upper metro area getting redder. So to balance out the slight blue that had in the neighbor next to it. So the Republicans did well in this election and kept the Senate seats and actually picked up 5 seats in the House as well. The key takeaways for us from this election was we had a severe loss of important House members. When you look at this map from 2020, there's not a lot of blue. As I pointed out, these are all population centers that we can point to here: Winona, Rochester, the cities, Duluth. We don't have a lot of Democrats that represent rural districts outside of these areas on the Iron Range in the Minnesota House. This was Chair Poppy's district that flipped from kind of blue to red. So we have a new Republican representative there. She was the Ag chair in the House. The Ag vice chair was Jeff Brand, who is from this Nicollet County district here. We lost both of our, traditional corn, soybean farming Democrats that had been on that committee that really had been good champions of agriculture. So now the Minnesota House is 70 DFL members versus 64 Republican members. In the last election, 89% of incumbents were reelected. 0 Republican incumbents lost. All the Republican incumbents maintained their seat, while we had 5 DFL incumbents lose. So that the majority, like I said, was 75-59, now down to 70-64. 18 seats were open at the time of election. This comes into play. Some of these seats that were lost by Democrats were ones that they had gained in 2018 that maybe had a Republican that was vulnerable, that a lot of those Republicans decided not to run. Some of the other areas where we would have expected to see some flipping, we had people choose not to run, and that allowed things to maintain. This is the map of the election for the last Senate race in 2020. It's not startlingly different at all. As I mentioned, this is Senator Frentz here, Democrat. Has Mankato here. A lot of these are bigger districts, so some of these population centers get diluted in those. And we do still see the 2 Democrats up here that we'll talk about in a second, Bach and Tomasoni on this map. But the map holds pretty true, with the shaded areas being the blue areas and the white areas on this map being the red. The Minnesota Senate, the makeup now is 34 Republicans and 31 Democrats in the DFL party, and 2 senators that are now independent, caucusing with the Republicans. So here, these seats here, Bach and Tomasoni, moved to independent status. They left the Democratic Party. They're caucusing with the Republicans now. One of the drivers of that, Senator Bach, had been the majority leader, been the minority leader, a longtime leader in that caucus, and he lost his bid to be the majority leader or minority leader at the time, I guess, to Senator Kent from Woodbury. In that, there was some, I guess, hard feelings created, and there's kind of some writing on the wall that after losing, he was not a power player in that caucus anymore. So leaving that caucus gave him a chance to get a chairmanship in the Senate and really wield some power for his constituents in this session. So that gives the Republicans still a strong hold. We did see some seats held by longtime DFL senators down in this area where we saw Gene Poppy lose. We saw Senator Sparks lose. And he was a chair on the ag side. Again, a proponent of agriculture, really one of the voices in agriculture we worked with a lot in that caucus. It doesn't matter as much now with the Republicans in power. We have Senator Weber from this area of the state on taxes. We have Senator Westrom on ag from up in this area, corn, soybean, wheat growing areas where be very familiar with agriculture, been there a long time, doing a really great job. Amanda will talk about more of those power players and chairs a little bit more, but this isn't something that's crucial now for agricultural groups, but could be if power were to switch in that 22 election, if the DFL were to flip. We just see that same void in agricultural familiar seats in the Democratic caucus, this like we do in the House caucus with the Democrats. We didn't see the losses that the House Republicans did in 2018. I think a lot of people expected that. We had House districts that went to the blue side from red. If the senators would have followed, we would have seen that flip. Again, that red going redder helped in some of these Senate districts to balance out some of that blue getting bluer, and some of the other areas of the state where Democrats had a control, like with Senator Sparks, they just weren't able to keep that. The biggest story then we can see is that Minnesota is still the only state being run by a divided government, with the House being held by the DFL and the Republicans holding the Senate. Every other state has the House and Senate, if they have a bicameral, with the same party. Obviously, if it's unicameral like Nebraska, they all are the same party. They only have one majority. It's only one party to go to there, house to go to, body to go to, I guess. Many of the issues that led to this red getting redder and blue getting bluer are a lot of these, it's never happened before, unprecedented things. Obviously, the budget isn't unprecedented. We've seen deficits in Minnesota's forecast before. However, this time we went from years of surplus, years and years and years of surpluses, all of a sudden to a deficit, basically because of COVID and the economy and what's happening with those measures and the restaurants being shut down. As we heard the last speaker talk, there's a lot of business that's still going good, but some that's not going as well. And that has really led the forecast to have a deficit. How we're going to deal with that deficit and when we deal with that deficit, obviously we saw a lot of division in the parties in the last summer with all of the special sessions. And that'll continue to be a big plot at the Capitol with how we handle it for the next biennium and coming up with a balanced budget. The state is not the federal government. We can't deficit spend, so they need to come up with a balanced budget. How they do that is going to be very divisive and really kind of make the job pretty hard for some of the folks up there. COVID still obviously going on, and we see a lot of split on the governor's emergency powers. That'll continue to drive this division on the red getting redder and blue getting bluer. And a lot of the civil unrest we're seeing, with the Black Lives Matter or the mega protests in DC, some of the rhetoric around that will also really continue to drive a wedge. So when you have the divided legislature like this, it makes the job hard. The election makes the job of advocacy for agriculture hard for a number of reasons. One, we have a lot of new faces to interact with, a loss of longtime ag allies, like as I mentioned, lots of information gaps to fill for another reason that we'll talk about. Obviously, we're dealing with real complex issues when we're dealing with agriculture, things like the 179 conformity. It took a couple of discussions with a lot of different tax attorneys for even me to understand what was going on and how that got messed up. So getting all of these legislators who aren't as familiar with this stuff on board is difficult. There's also no easy path for legislation. Usually if it's Democrat control, we can, on both sides, we can count on getting a bonding bill passed. If it's Republicans, we can count on getting a tax bill passed. With a split, we don't have that easy path. We saw that in the special sessions and getting some things done that, they had to tack on a bonding bill to a tax bill to get things done. So the no easy path is really going to make things difficult. One of the things we do have going for us is that everybody that's on the other side of us has the same kind of problems that we have. So, I think there's a lot of rhetoric around the divided government that things pretty much grind to a halt. Obviously, even before COVID, we saw many years where we had to have special sessions to help the legislature get their job done just because of that going back and forth and the differences. But really with agriculture, particularly with corn soybean growers, You know, we're bipartisan for a reason. And I think that this legislature really gives us opportunities where a lot of groups will have difficulties with that. The main reason for that is ag issues that we're dealing with usually cross the aisle pretty well. When we're dealing with biofuels, when we're talking with Republicans, it's the rural economic development. When we're talking with Democrats, it's the greenhouse gas reductions. Biofuels do a good job of accomplishing both those things. So pretty popular. School tax relief that we had passed in a divided legislature. You know, we're helping to get schools built, which is the message that Democrats will like. Also lowering the taxes faced by tax burden faced by small businesses, which the Republicans could vote for. So a lot of these issues we deal, you know, aren't a one-party issue. They're not going to be tied up in some of this rhetoric we saw earlier. So we can hopefully still get some things done. A bigger hurdle that I see, here are some of the numbers. The Republican, or not the Republican, the House and Senate nonpartisan offices get demographic information from all the members of the legislature, and they collect that. You can go look that up on their website. If you're dorky like me, you like to look at some of these things and watch the trends and see what's happening. And the biggest thing I see that is really hampering efforts up in St. Paul for agriculture is this loss of farmers. So these are the people that have identified farming as their profession, or at least part of their profession, when they're in the legislature. In the 62nd session, 1961 to 1962, we saw 63 farmers. Those are spread pretty evenly between the Senate and the House. And by evenly, I mean 1/3, 2/3, like we would expect to see. That they were pretty well intermingled in both Democrats and Republicans, and in both the House and Senate. You can see that number steadily declines over the sessions here until we get to this current session, in which only 8 members have identified their profession or their occupation as farming. All of these are in the House minority. Those House Republicans has all 8 farmers right now. The reason that's key, you know, senators or representatives like Paul Anderson, who is a farmer, is not eligible to be on the agricultural chair, have a gavel position, and be that person in power in that role, because he is in the minority. So while there are 8 farmers there that can help educate on some of these issues, they're all in one body, and they're all unfortunately in the minority right now. The good news is we're not starting at zero. A lot of the leadership is familiar with agriculture. We've been working with Representative Hortman and Senator Gazelka for a long time now. They're familiar with a lot of our issues. Important legislators, you know, Representative Paul Anderson, Representative Marquardt, Senators Westrom, Senator Weber, all very familiar. Senator Doms has been a great champion of biofuels. So we're not at a total loss when it comes to the senators and representatives that are familiar with our issues. We also have a long history of proven success on ag issues, especially in a divided legislature. Biodiesel mandates, school tax mandates, the Ag Innovation Campus that we have passed all happened in divided legislature. Membership, you know, I think this is where I give my membership pitch. You know, membership matters. The soy checkoff, we can't use our soy checkoff dollars for membership. We rely on membership dollars to accomplish our agenda. We do have a very strong membership, but we can always use some more. And we really have a lot of strategic partners on key issues, you know, with working with Bruce Clavin and the wheat growers and their lobbyists, corn growers, Farm Bureau, Farmers Union, Agri-Growth. There was a 179 coalition that included a lot of different chambers of commerce and other groups, construction groups that really came together to help us pass that. You know, it's kind of like the no man is an island. We all work together on these issues, and hopefully as we continue to work on these, those coalitions will remain in place here. So looking a little bit into what we are going to try to accomplish here in the legislature and with the administration for 2021, to briefly wrap up. Number one, soybean growers will be looking at protecting the biodiesel mandate. There always seems to be an attack coming from environmental groups who say biodiesel is not clean enough for them and want to move to all electric, or big oil coming back wanting that 20% of their market back. That's constantly under attack. It returns back 63 cents to $1.50, depending on where you're at and how a basis is affected, to a bushel of soybeans. So really important for us to protect that biodiesel mandate. We're going to be working to protect funding for key programs, specifically, looking at the Department of Agriculture. They're 1/3 of 1% of the budget, but the agriculture economy is about 1/3 of the state GDP. So looking at making sure things like the noxious weed programs and programs we need to help protect our crop input usage, or help us with pest diseases, pests that our crops have, that we keep the funding in those programs. If they're looking for tax cuts or looking for budget cuts to fill the gap in the deficit, we're encouraging them to look at Bowser, DNR, PCA, and those agencies, and stay away from the programs at MDA that are actually helping our farmers. And protecting the gains we've made on taxes in the past few years is key as well. The school property tax reductions and the 179 conformity that I mentioned, making sure that those don't become a way that we close that budget gap is key for us. We're looking at a lot of different crop input protection. Neonics have been a hot topic. MDA recently added 2 neonics to their pesticides of concern for surface waters. Along with that, the DNR has done a deer spleen study and a seed spill study, so we'll be watching to see administratively what comes of that. Dicamba has been a hot button issue for soybean growers the last few years. We have a new EPA label with 3 different deadlines, basically using whatever product you're using has a different deadline on when it can be sprayed. And MDA has pretty much announced pretty blatantly that they'll be really looking into this use this year, really making sure people are following that label exactly and following all the record keeping requirements of that label. So we'll be encouraging people to do that so that we don't see some limitations on these inputs in the future here in the legislature. Along with that, even though there's administrative action, we know we're going to see some action in the legislature. The Pesticide Action Network, an advocacy group on the other side, announced this morning that they were going to be supporting legislation that incentivizes agricultural producers to lessen their use of these chemicals. So we'll be watching those to make sure that that we don't get some undue regulations on farmers' right to farm. Another big thing that we'll see is biofuels. With the Governor's Council on Biofuels, the move towards state clean car, MSG will be very active on this issue. We believe that there are ways to increase the use of biofuels in the Minnesota to achieve carbon reduction goals. We're not interested in following another state's mandates and walking down the path that they want to walk down. Minnesota's been a leader with biofuels, been a leader with greenhouse gas reduction through their use, and we are pushing the state to continue that. As part of that, the MSGA fully supports the corn growers' move to E15 that Amanda will talk about. I want to give you an update just quickly on the Ag Innovation Campus. This is a project we worked on in the 2018 legislature. We got a $5 million grant for what at the time we were calling the Soy Innovation Campus. That idea has really grown. It started as a need that the Soybean Research and Promotion Council had in getting specialty soybeans crushed. We didn't have a place to get a small batch crush that we could do research. So we were looking at doing that. We found some mechanical crush equipment in Arkansas that we were able to purchase and move up to Crookston with the grant dollars that the state got. And really the equipment is food grade ready. And it's non-crop specific. It's not a chemical crush. So the idea has really grown into an Ag Innovation Campus, looking at crushing a lot of different specialty crops there, and have a lot of different people interested in what could be done on that site and how they could be involved. So we continue to talk to new partners in that. The air permits have all been approved by the MPCA for the site in Crookston, and we look to begin building in the spring and hopefully crushing our first crops in November of next year, or this year, actually, sorry, now that we flipped over to January. So used to saying next year, but it's November of this year that we should be crushing crops up there. With that, here's my contact information, jsmentek@mnsoybean.com. Our office number here or on our website at mnsoybean.org. If there are any questions that come up after the question time here, I'd be happy to answer them. But at this point, I'll wrap it up and open it up if there's any questions.
Thank you, Joe. We have one question in the box, and I'll tag on to it. With FBI warning of an armed attack in all 50 state capitals on January 20th, is Minnesota prepared is the question? And I would add on with balancing security, both with this issue and COVID in St. Paul, how's Minnesota Soybeans working to effectively advocate with the vast restrictions and you guys being able to be in the building?
Yeah, Amanda will get into how things are operating there now. Obviously things are mostly virtual right now at the Capitol with very limited contact. I would say our lobbyists have picked up a lot of new cell phone numbers, a lot of Zoom meetings that we have not traditionally done. It kind of seemed like the legislature hasn't ended this year, in 2020, because of all the special sessions. And that really gave us an opportunity to have more FaceTime with those legislators as we were talking with them virtually. We've been doing a lot of Zoom meetings, a lot of different calls, inviting them into different meetings that we normally would not have seen. A lot of different letter writing. One of the big things that we did hear mentioned, and we hear mentioned a lot from leadership, is, Minnesota Soybean has a tool that we use called Phone to Action, where we, we'll put out in our mini line or other social media things where if you text a keyword to a number, you get enrolled in a system that will immediately contact your legislators. And we heard from a few different legislators who were signed up for themselves that they knew once they got a text saying, hey, text this number to this to send a letter to your legislator, that they were going to get anywhere from 20 to 100 emails based on the issue. So, we pretty effectively used that while we couldn't go to the Capitol. We were lucky. We were the last group that had their Hill visits, had met with the governor and stuff the day before the shutdown. So we did look, we came out luckily on that. This year, we're going to be setting up a lot more Zoom meetings, a lot more meetings with this format to try to reach out to some of those people, and doing a lot more of those online campaigns to try to reach out to those new representatives. As far as the Capitol being prepared, that's a very good question. I know they have the fencing up still. They never really took their measures down from the Black Lives Matter movement protests that they saw this year. Obviously, they thought they were prepared for that, and they still had some statues torn down, saw some activity from that. So, I hope they're prepared. I hope they're taking seriously what's happening and some of these threats that we're hearing. But obviously, I don't know if they can ever be prepared enough. And I guess we can just hope that they are, and hope that things don't get disrupted, and we'll be able to continue to have a strong voice up in the Capitol.
Thank you, Joe. Gary, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Charlie, and thank you to Joe Smentek for that interesting presentation.